Hello, virtual world, and everyone calling in via webinar and telephone for this, the beginning of Audubon California's 2020 Advocacy Day webinar series. My name is Pedro Hernandez. I will be the facilitator of this webinar series, and I'm a new addition to the staff of Audubon California. I'm the Outreach and Engagement Manager for Climate Policies, and I'll be joined by Audubon California's Policy Director, Mike Lyons, for an informative discussion about what the 2020 Advocacy Day will entail, some policy updates, and a brief training just to build capacity for this new shift in Audubon's first virtual and remote advocacy push. For those who are following us on Facebook Live or also on this webinar, there will be several different prompts that will be coming up on the screen. So just a heads up, feel free to use the chat function via Zoom here, or add a comment onto our live stream on Facebook Live as well too. We want to make this as inclusive and as responsive as we can to your ideas as well. So thank you so much, and we'll get started with our presentation. So thank you again. And if there are any questions that come up, feel free to drop them in the chat. We do have some chat moderators to ensure that everyone's concerns can be addressed. So for a brief overview of our agenda, we'll have an Advocacy Day overview, some discussions of policies, about 25 minutes for skill building, and round out our webinar with 5 or 10 minutes of question and answers and next steps as well. And so like I aforementioned, our speakers will be Mike Lyons, the Policy Director, Juan Altamirano, who is our Associate Policy Director, who is currently in a legislative hearing right now, advocating for some of the bills we'll be discussing today, and myself as well. But just to get things started, this will be our first interactive prompt. So to get us into the advocacy mindset and just to see who's on this webinar, if you could enter your name, your region, which could be city or general region like Southern California, and one lesson that you've learned in your past advocacy experience. So we'll take about a minute or so just to see what's populating in the chat, and to use this as a first trial for folks who are maybe new to the webinar experience.
Pedro, we might ask them too to put in their Audubon chapter if they are associated with one. If not, no worries.
Great, yeah, absolutely. Oh, cool. So let's see, who's joining us so far? So we have Maureen from Oakland. Let's see, and I'm looking at these lessons. Control your emotions, advocacy on the city level is complicated. Be succinct. Let's see, best lesson, positive tone. Another lesson, it's easy and comfortable. Listen to other concerns. And I'm seeing Amy from San Jose. You need to learn how to talk to those who disagree with you as well. Robert Snow, I have learned that the representatives want to see, wow, so many comments, want to see their constituents, absolutely. And that's one reason why we want to make sure that we're mobilizing Audubon California's network as well. And let's see, what works for you to avoid anxiety or burnout? Wow, yes. I've been learning that in my my couple of years in the advocacy sector as well too. And so let's round out with maybe 2 more comments. Self-advocacy is about mental illness and physical illness, absolutely. And one more, be over-prepared, which again, I don't think has hurt anyone. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of interesting comments. Let's see if folks can still be populating this. We'll I think this would be a great resource for people just to be flipping through the webinar, but in the interest of time, we'll begin our presentation, and I'll kind of cede my time to Mike Lyons, who is the policy director for Audubon, California. So take it away, Mike. And again, thank you everyone for participating in the chat.
Thanks, Pedro. And as we transition from the comments, first of all, as Pedro indicated, please feel free to continue to put your comments and thoughts and questions into the chat as we're going through our discussion today. We will try to get to as many of them as we can during the course of our conversation and during the Q&A at the end. If we don't, we will try to follow up with the individuals, or you should always feel free to email us or contact us through other means. We want to make sure we try to address all your questions and concerns. I want to point out Drew Feldman, who's a great colleague from San Bernardino Audubon. His comment is, advocacy doesn't always work, but it's better than doing nothing. And Drew has really been a leader down there of doing advocacy, litigation, and all sorts of other kinds of engagement. And it's true, it doesn't always work, but it's always a productive step forward and can lay the groundwork for some other actions if need be. So what I'd like to do as we launch in here is talk a bit about Advocacy Day and what we've done in the past and what we're going to do this year under changed circumstances, and give folks a perspective of where we're coming from and what our goals are. And then likely, because, excuse me, Juan Altamirano is in a hearing today to cover one of our bills for the state legislature, which is reconvened, I will probably be covering his time as well to talk about our state priorities. Excuse me for a moment. So let's go ahead and just sort of launch in. Next slide, please. It's a bad time for me to have something caught in my throat. So the first thing I would like to start with is really to be addressing the moment that we're in right now, trying to do conservation, bird conservation in particular, at a moment. Excuse me for a moment. I'm very sorry, I had to mute there just so I could cough. So to really be acknowledging the moment that we're in with COVID-19, the huge public health crisis, and as well as the economic crisis, and to be sensitive to the harm that people are suffering in all sorts of ways and the mental duress. And it's fair to ask, and we've been asked, is it fair to be advocating for bird conservation at a time like this? And our answer is yes, to do that in appropriate ways and to engage in sensitive ways. First and foremost, birds were already in crisis before this happened. They will be after. And also, we're seeing a lot of pressure from industry and others to roll back, including the federal government, to roll back long-standing environmental protections. And so just in the last few weeks, the Trump administration has announced rollbacks on the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, on the Clean Air Act, on the Clean Water Act. And so this work still needs to be done, and we need to do it as well as we can during the crises and do it in different ways. The other thing is that we know that in addressing the concerns of birds and things like natural climate solutions for climate change, we also benefit human health and the economy. And so the kind of solutions that we're talking about are not taking away from public health, they're not taking away from the economy. They're going to be contributing to those things. And so, but I think it's fair to kind of address that question right now. Next slide. So why do an Advocacy Day? Many of the people on this video call have probably done our Advocacy Day before, but if you hadn't, I think it's fair to really ask that question. It's a lot of effort and time that we ask of people. But really, it's Audubon's opportunity to speak up for birds in Sacramento. It really elevates our presence and our priorities in Sacramento. It also builds engagement skills. And one of our big goals, which I'll talk about in a moment, is making sure that we're not building skills in our membership just for this day, but that people walk away, and you might see in some of the comments like Dave and others have said, they've built skills to find out that it's not difficult to talk to your legislators. And we want you to take those skills, move forward, and have other actions at the local, at the state, and the federal level that participants feel empowered to do. And then it also is a really important moment annually in the Audubon, California community. And it's too bad that we can't gather in person this year. It's always a great time. but there's also some opportunities that doing a virtual Advocacy Day presents. And so we want to take some lessons from that and continue to use it to build community. Next slide. So this year, for Advocacy Day 2020, we've always had kind of a theme that we've rallied around, and we've certainly been talking about climate change a lot in recent years. But really this year, we've been focused, and we came into 2020, and I'll talk about this in a moment, with several bills to address climate change, their impacts on birds and on communities. And we're still pushing for climate change action to build more resilient bird populations and human communities, and how those two are going to work together. And so you'll be hearing a lot about climate change on this conversation, and then the webinars that we'll be holding next week, which we'll hope you'll join us for climate change in the Central Valley and policies there related to ag and water and communities. Megan Hurdle will be leading that. And then on a week from Friday, Andrea Jones and Anna Weinstein from our Coasts and Marine programs will be joining to talk about coastal impacts of climate change and what we want to do there. Next slide. So I mentioned our goals, and I want to reiterate these, and I wanted to state them clearly because I'm hoping that all the participants that are engaged keep these in mind. They keep us accountable to them, and they also use that to drive how they engage going forward. And first and foremost is that we really present a strong and positive voice in Audubon, for Audubon in Sacramento, and really any advocacy that we do. And by positive, I don't mean that we're always agreeing with people. I mean, we're positive in that, like, we're raising issues and we're providing solutions, and that even when we disagree with people, that we engage in a strong and affirmative way. We want to make sure that we're activating the network this year, but we also want to keep everybody safe. As I mentioned, it's really important to us that we build skills in ourselves and in you. And it sounds a little like fluffy, but it's true, and it's been an important guiding post for us in the past, is we want everybody that engages, that's the members, that's our staff who will be team leaders, and it's also the legislators and their staff, that's a rewarding experience for everybody. And I see it as kind of a customer service role that we on the policy team have. Next slide. So the timeline for what you can expect for Advocacy Day this year, we have our first kind of launching workshop today. We'll be going through some of the tips and the priorities. Then as I mentioned, on the 20th, we'll be talking about the Central Valley and climate change. On the 22nd, coasts and climate change. And then on May 29th, I want to mention those other workshops, they're optional. You can feel free to continue to participate in Advocacy Day on June 2nd, even if you're not engaged on the May 20th and 22nd webinars. But we would really ask that you set aside an hour from 12 to 1 on May 29th for Advocacy Day preparation. Those of you that have done it in the past know that that's when we go through all the materials that you'll be using for Advocacy Day. We'll usually have a script. We'll be assigning speakers this time around, and going through any new political developments that you need to know about. So that 1 hour is a really important prep time, and we'll have a Q&A on some of the issues. And then June 2nd itself, anybody who does want to participate, you don't have to, but we will have video calls with legislators and their staff. Audubon California members, our staff will be running those. And then the Audubon network will be asking you through your social media networks and in other ways to be engaging that way, to tag legislators, ask them to take action on climate change and our priority bills. Next slide. So what to expect in this timeline? We are currently putting together our Audubon staff team that will be the leaders for these calls and for the different regions. They will reach out to you and introduce themselves. Audubon staff will calendar those meetings on June 2nd with legislators. They will host them, so they will launch the Zoom. You will just have a link that you can join and be part of that. So you'll be hearing more from the team leaders in the next couple of weeks. Then we will also, the policy team will be drafting several different pieces of materials for you to use. We'll be making the team assignments, providing you with updates on and scripts on the priority bills and talking points and tips for effective advocacy. And as I said, we'll be running a session on May 29th. Next slide. Oh, so now I'd like to I'd like to step into our policy overview since Juan Altamirano could not join us. Juan's actually at the Water Parks and Wildlife hearing for the California State Assembly to talk about our bill AB 3030, which I'll talk about in just a moment. So he's off doing good work. He's not just slacking at home. All right, next slide, please. So it doesn't come as a surprise, I think, to anybody on this call that we are in a much different circumstance than we were when we came into this year. And I'll talk about some of the specifics around the state budget and politics when I get to that in just a moment. But I want to just I want to set the groundwork a little bit so you understand where the kind of policy environment in which we're working. So first, with the real, I think, rolling out of the response to COVID in March, and when people understood the gravity, started to understand the gravity of the situation, the state legislature immediately came into session, passed $1 billion in new spending to address that. That's just for the state. And then they immediately went into recess. So all the legislators went home to abide by the state's stay-in-place orders and have been trying to work from their homes since that time, but it definitely has changed the legislative calendar. In May, the legislature reconvened. They're doing a limited number of hearings. As I mentioned, one is in one right now. And they have been directed by leadership to really winnow down the number of bills that we'll be working on this year. And members have basically been told, you can have 1 to 2 bills, but that should be directly related to COVID response or the economy or some other high priority issues. Oh, I think we jumped a couple ahead on slides. And then to flag looking forward from June to August, the legislature will have to wrap up the budget in June, but we expect some additional budget legislation to come out in July and August, which will likely have additional and further budget cuts. We have been told that the January budget proposed by the governor, which had quite a bit of new spending for natural resources, has been completely scrapped. And tomorrow, we're expecting a new budget, which will have, I would say, much greater austerity in it. And we expect cuts to natural resources and other agencies. And then we expect further cuts to occur in July and August once we get state tax revenues back and understand really where we're at financially. So that's going to be a hard time. We know from the 2008 recession, natural resources took the hit first, took big hits. We will likely take more hits now, but we're trying to play defense and help folks understand that they shouldn't be making budget cuts right now that are going to harm the economy and people more in the future. Next slide. So giving a little more context, when we started 2020, we had 3.9% unemployment in the state. The projected unemployment, according to the California Department of Finance, is going to be 18% at points during this year. We also started with a proposed budget from the governor, and that proposed budget had a surplus in it of $5.6 billion. We had a rainy day fund in the state of $21 billion that we have been putting into for the last 10 years since the last recession. Now we have a projected deficit, budget deficit of $54 billion, and we can't even use all those reserves. I think they can use about 10 billion. So that means we have somewhere from 30 to 45 billion of deficit that we're going to have to find additional budget cuts for this year. So it's very difficult to be advocating for natural resource spending in that kind of environment. And I don't want to bum you out, but I did want to provide you with those numbers for context. Next slide. So where does that leave us? When Audubon California started this year, we came in with 5 bills that we were co-sponsoring or authoring, similar to the Migratory Bird Protection Bill that we did last year. We had bills on conservation ranching, and we were working on bonds and all sorts of other things. Those have had to be tabled for this year, but we do have 3 bills that are still live. The first is AB 3030, and I'll touch a bit more on that in a moment. But essentially, it is setting the goal for the state to protect 30% of its lands and waters by 2030. We have 2619, which is a coastal resilience bill, which I think is continuing to change, and we'll see where that goes. And then we have SB 45, which is really a bond measure similar to the bond we did a few years ago, Prop 68, or the water bond in 2014, which is bond sales for significant investments in natural resources. Where we're at today is we have these 3 bills that are still live, as I mentioned. We're looking to the budget. We'll review it when it comes out and trying to mitigate the cuts to natural resources where possible and appropriate. And we have to now aggressively defend against industry claims for regulatory relief. You're seeing that at the federal level. You're certainly seeing it at the state level. Housing developers are saying, they need more relief in order to build things out faster. And usually that means environmental shortcuts. And we're trying to provide a counterbalance to that allows for affordable housing, promotes the economy, but does not further wreck the environment in California, where we've already lost so much of our natural habitats. Next slide. I mentioned AB 3030 from Assemblymember Kalra, who many of you may remember was our champion on our migratory bird protection bill last year. For those of you who don't know, the federal government has rolled back protections under the Federal Migratory Bird Treaty Act. Assemblymember Kalra was our champion in a bill to make sure that those rollbacks by the Trump administration do not take effect under state law in California. And we were successful, and that's already bearing fruit in protection of birds here in the state, even as birds may suffer more in other parts of the country with the federal rollback. But this bill, AB 3030, declares that it's California's goal to protect at least 30% of its land and waters by 2030. And much of that is already under some form of permanent protection, about 20% of the land and about 15 to 16% of the waters. We're looking to set an aggressive goal, as we did with our climate legislation back in 2008, to really set those goals to try to achieve that protection, and then at the same time contribute to the similar levels of protection for at the national and international levels. Next slide. We've talked a lot about natural resource bonds. There's three major proposals that are on the table right now. $4.5 billion bond proposal from the governor, though we'll see if they will stick with that given the new austerity. The Senate has a $5.5 billion proposal, and the Assembly now has a $7.1 billion proposal. And that would go into conservancies, Department of Fish and Wildlife, state parks, sustainable groundwater and ecosystems management, a lot of our priorities that we've identified in the past. I am wary of bond spending. Bonds cost a lot of money. Basically, it's $2 in state funding for every $1 we get to go to projects. But there are not other avenues right now for natural resource spending, and we know that the environment in many places is in crisis. We're not sure if the bonds will go forward this year, though polling indicates voters would still support them. But they are sort of being recast as economic stimulus at this point, and we'll see how they change. But that will be a priority we'll continue to discuss. Next slide. And then looking forward in 2021, we'll have to continue to adjust to the new budget realities. We will be engaging at the state level and at the federal level with our colleagues at National Audubon. And we will be sending the message that natural solutions, natural climate solutions, parks and other things will be good for everybody. And then this kind of helps me transition. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Pedro. To really that, the role for members and why Advocacy Day and continuing advocacy across the year is so important. And your voice really does matter, and it does result in changes to policy and law in Sacramento and at the local and federal levels as well. Legislators again and again tell us that the number one thing that's affected their position on a particular bill at the state is that they've had a constituent call them and give them a piece of their mind or represent a body or a block of the constituents. And that is a value that Audubon brings that almost no other NGOs have at the same level, maybe except Sierra Club and to a certain degree CNPS or the California Native Plant Society. Audubon members show up, we make our voices heard, we talk, we offer solutions. And that has made a difference and will continue to make a difference in Sacramento. So with that, I'd like to transition over to Pedro, who will be talking a little more about the digital advocacy skills.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. I wonder how many webinars include that, like as a beginning. Oh, I had to check if I was unmuted. But we actually, when Mike was wrapping up his section, we just got a text message from Juan that AB 3030 just made it out of its legislative hearing today. And so it'll head to the Appropriations Committee on June 2nd, which will actually coincide perfectly with our Advocacy Day. So it's good to know that things are moving in the right direction. But as far as my section, I think Mike did a great job in setting the context for our advocacy. So we are in a pandemic. There are budget cuts. climate change is an existential threat, to communities and also, vulnerable bird populations. But there are a lot of assets and strengths that Audubon California's network and chapter network bring to the situation as well too, which, in my opinion, as biased as it may be, I think can also help our advocacy and ensure that we're still getting the protections that we need during these critical times. So thank you all again. And heading into our second prompt, I wanted to take a quick temperature check of where folks are on the issue of remote advocacy. So a quick yes or no prompt: have you participated in remote advocacy in the last year? So this could be social media, this could be calling your legislator, sending an email, writing something to the press. So if everyone can take a quick 30 seconds or so, I think that'd be a very interesting sense for us at Audubon California to see how we can also support you all during this transition into a virtual advocacy day. So I'm seeing a good mix of yes and no's by email. I'm seeing a lot of emails, letters to policymakers. Yes, awesome. Okay, so it looks like we do have some momentum, but also some room for growth. And so let's keep moving forward then. So again, a quick background for folks who are maybe unfamiliar with the Survival by Degrees report that came out last year. There's some pretty powerful conclusions, one being that 2/3 of the birds in North America are at risk of extinction due to climate change. But we also do know that up to 76% of them can be saved through climate action. So we have a sense of what is at stake, but we also know that if we are advocating at this moment and getting some of the policy victories that we need, we can also, help mitigate significantly this existential threat. And so just a quick discussion on virtual and remote advocacy. There definitely has been a nearly universal shift to organizations and grassroots groups using virtual advocacy right now, mostly being because it's one of the only ways that we can still be active. But I wanted to just discuss very briefly some opportunities and challenges in this. So let's start off with the challenges, because I want to end on a good note. Well, I mean, first of all, there's less degrees of human connection. All advocacy, I want to say, is reliant on human connection. But again, we just can't physically meet in person. There is a need to also build new skills, whether this is learning how to use Zoom or how to figure out how to set up an email listserv. And it's also dependent on access to technology and the internet. So for some low-income communities or rural communities that have internet access gaps or are being affected by the digital divide, it's not necessarily as inclusive as possible. But again, it is one of the things that we can do. So it is also an opportunity to sustain civic engagement in a time where city councils are limiting public participation, and when the legislature isn't, well, for the first time in over 100 years, declared a recess as well. This does also increase accessibility for advocacy opportunities for people who have mobility issues, or folks who can't take a full day or two just to travel to Sacramento and stay overnight, then travel back for 8 hours. We can connect with digitally with decision makers who have a heavy Twitter presence or Facebook presence as well. Capitalize on new tools that weren't available 5 or 10 years ago, like Zoom, for example. And again, increase exposure to media, because there are a lot of press outlets and reporters and just an overall appetite for using social media as a way to figure out what the important topics are that people are discussing. And our goals for engagement are pretty simple, but I think powerful as well. We want to increase awareness and build support. I mean, I think this is a universal goal for all advocates or pretty much any group. But really, I think it's also ensuring that the awareness that habitat restoration, ecosystem protection, and vulnerable wildlife are also seen as like co-equal concerns to many of the other crises as well. So we're all walking a tightrope, but definitely there's tons of important things happening. And also to demonstrate that taking care of birds helps everyone. As an important like indicator species, through taking care of birds, we can see different approaches to solving climate change, addressing issues like drought as well too, and overall, increased warming temperatures as well too. So we can see that protecting birds will actually yield a lot of co-benefits for the ecosystem and for human communities. And also just generally, we need to pass policy. The policy is what will set the framework for legal protections and help allocate millions and hopefully billions of dollars for the good projects that we want to see in the state and ultimately in the world. And so on that note, I kind of want to shift to the main focus of this section, which is mobilizing the Audubon California network. This is one of the most recent maps that I could see that has all the different state chapters, centers, and state offices. And as we can all see, California definitely has one of the widest wingspans of the entire national Audubon chapter. And, California is a sizable component of the Pacific Flyway as well. So I think the network in Audubon, California presents, heading into these existential crises and political dynamics that Mike did a good job in mentioning. We do have this network that is, I think, a very important asset that will support all of our advocacy so far. And just a quick maybe anecdote. Last week, we sent out the notice that Advocacy Day would be virtual. So we did our first email blast. In less than a week, we had over 300 people register for Advocacy Day as well. And just figuring out, looking through the cities and regions that people are represented, we have literally almost every major sector in the state represented so far. And this is just almost overnight. So I think that tapping into our network can be super useful. And again, ensuring that our priorities, like addressing climate change and vulnerable birds, can still be realistic goals for 2020. And so building off of this point, I want to spend a couple of minutes just discussing some issues on internal organization that I think will lend themselves to all the different kind of digital and remote asks. So I'm generally calling this the phone tree style model for advocacy. I'm not necessarily reinventing the wheel here, but I think having a quick conversation about how all of our networks are organized for mobilization, and is there a structure that will support short-term effective mobilization as well is important. So the main message is, if we do have a pretty solid internal organization, this can lend itself to setting up call-in campaigns, or circulating social media tweets, or sending an email to any target, really. I think also just assessing how effective the kind of network that we're working with can also strengthen internal communication, because we'll have as we keep identifying advocacy opportunities, we'll have more opportunities just to practice these skills, and again develop more internal capacity and expertise. And I think a pretty robust distribution network and internal coordination system supports recruitment and retainment, and just overall notification for meetings and general check-ins. But discussing a little bit about the structure, again, this is only one model that a network can look like, and it's mostly just to have something out there to analyze. Different chapters have different needs and different staffing capacity and different talent pools. So definitely, I think this is something that should be customized depending on whatever your own network needs. But I think just again, maybe having these discussions internally heading into this big advocacy push will also help us respond to some of the short notice advocacy alerts that will be happening. Because like we mentioned with one, many of the bills that we'll be discussing and ultimately supporting for Advocacy Day are still heading through different hearings as well. And again, the legislative session ends until August, and so we want to make sure that we have an infrastructure that will last beyond June 2nd. And so again, just going through a very brief and basic list of what you might need for folks who maybe have not done this before. Obviously, you need phones, some way to communicate. Willing participants, talking points, and we'll actually have a brainstorming crowdsourcing activity for developing talking points in a few minutes. We need phone numbers, coordinators, and a time commitment. Many of these asks are not super time intensive for the general base. And so I think this is something that we can leverage because people are at home now. These aren't super huge time commitments. And again, virtual advocacy is not the absence of human contact. Like calling a elected's office is still a human interaction. You know, sending an email is still human interaction. So I just really would like to impart that there is a lot of connection and weight that can come out of this. And again, just an idea of what scheduling could look like. For this distribution network, you can plan sustained engagement over a week. So if you have maybe 15 people, you can pace this out a couple of days at a time. Or, you know, you can completely flood an office for a day or two and, you know, have everyone call at different times of the day. So it's definitely whatever, I think these activities can be customized for whatever schedule people have. And so now we've kind of set the framework for, you know, we've established a need. We've established, at least in brief passing, what a structure could look like to convey these messages. And I want to open up the chat again and pull upon everyone's years of expertise. So we can have a like 5-minute section on what are the messages that decision makers need to hear. You know, there are tons of people who have been working in bird conservation longer than I have. But again, I think this is just a great resource to see what gold nuggets we can find with all this talent on the webinar. So let's open up the chat again, and I will go over the greatest hits that come up. So let's see. Addressing climate change can't be postponed. Very critical point. See, okay, the proverbial can cannot be kicked down the road any longer. Let's see. Amanda is saying protecting birds and natural resources equates to helping your constituents. Aaron is saying a positive impact on 3 levels: global, bird migration, local public health, and personal, because these issues matter to us. Great. Okay, Richard is bringing up pesticides. Definitely an important issue where I live in the San Joaquin Valley. Amy is saying climate change in capital must be a priority for legislation. Absolutely. And also, let's see, they need to hear the truth. It's good for freedom. Noel Sinclair, I believe is the last name. We're also seeing, let me see, don't let our efforts suffer setbacks due to COVID-19. Excessive single-use plastics and disposable trash of California. And actually, I think the name is Bettina. Hope I'm saying this right. I think that's a good point. Don't let our efforts suffer setbacks. A big, you know, internal conversation that we've been having at Audubon, California, and just more broadly, is to make sure that, I mean, we don't want to make anything worse. You know, I think if anything, I've been heading into these organizing efforts just to make sure that again, we're respecting all the different priorities that come out of a crisis and pandemic. But again, let's not make anything worse, because we're all very familiar with how critical these issues are. So going back into the chats, it still seems very active. I see Kathy saying climate change threats cut across conservation and economic sectors. We need to cement alliances. Absolutely, and I think that's also one of the benefits of an organization like Audubon working in so many cross-sector relationships. And let's see. Protect flora and fauna and their habitat to ensure future generation survival. Absolutely. Okay, so let's see. We'll give this comment section about 2 or 3 more minutes for folks who were still thinking about this. And again, you know, birds are nonpartisan. Absolutely. Jocelyn is saying, the joy birds bring to people, especially when everything is unsure. And maybe I just want to say on that point, I've actually have been doing a lot of birding during the COVID public restrictions and everything, because some awesome birding spots, you know, still haven't been closed, at least where I live in the city of Fresno. So it's been definitely a great experience for me to see how I can expand my engagement in the natural sector during these times as well. And let's see, Christine is also saying birds are an indicator of global health for all beings. And Gina is saying protecting birds represents protecting our shared U.S. heritage. Absolutely. You know, we have a national bird. Birds are on everything, and you know, I've honestly have learned a lot about. I studied history in school, so it's been fun seeing the history of birds as well. But wrapping up this section, if there are not kind of any other comments, I just want to say, like, this was awesome. We're going to be saving this chat as well too, and we are providing a toolkit, so I think it'd be a good idea to include some of these talking points that came up in the chat in this toolkit for other chapters to be referencing as well too. And so just wrapping up, we actually have a action item for people between now and June 2nd. So in the next couple of days, we'll be sending a toolkit, but we want to ask our chapter network to help us out contacting your assembly members in support of AB 3030. On June 2nd, which again will be our actual advocacy day, AB 3030 will be going to the Appropriations Committee, which in my experience in the state legislature has been very critical in figuring out if a bill actually is signed at the end of the legislative session. It's been one of the more difficult committees to pass through. And again, Juan was doing some great work to help get it to this point. But AB 3030 will again just set important critical benchmarks for the state of California to conserve natural lands and coastal areas as well. So I think this could be something that benefits all of California. So Mike, do you want to add anything to this call to action while we're kind of wrapping up the section?
Sure, yeah, I can touch on a couple things that I saw in the comments as well. And as Pedro indicated, these are really great. We'll be saving these and looking at these and thinking about how we incorporate some of what you have said into our collective messaging. We really appreciate there's a lot of passion I can just see even in the chat comments here for the issue. And so I appreciate that and everybody that's engaged on this. On AB 3030, if you want to learn more about the issue about sort of this effort to preserve 30% of the world's lands and oceans, E.O. Wilson, the renowned biologist, I think sometime fairly recently, he said, in the recent past, said, we should be preserving, 50% of the lands and waters of the earth, and people have kind of dialed that back a bit for expectations. But there has been, the UN has issued a report on this, And the California leadership from the governor and the head of the California Natural Resources has embraced the notion of protecting 30% of the global land and waters by 2030, or over the next several decades at least, in order to preserve biodiversity and preserve human health. And not to make light of the moment we're in, but there are a lot of people who have indicated that the decline of biodiversity has been a contributing factor to the kind of spread of diseases that we've seen, like COVID-19. And that's not just a sort of an opportunistic statement. It really is something that's going on. And so, and we know that as we take away more habitat and we reduce biodiversity, we're also leading to more conflicts with things like endangered species and the rest. And so AB 3030 is not regulatory, it's really just more of a call to action. But that's why we're asking for everyone's support this year to be moving that forward. And as Pedro indicated, we will be following up with an email that has a toolkit with some of the specifics around setting up a phone tree, using social media, coming up with a good hashtag and connecting with your friends, and some more information about both Advocacy Day and our upcoming webinars. So with that, did we want to go ahead and transition into the Q&A section? Pedro?
Yeah, actually. Yeah, so again, just keep an eye out for this message as well too. And if anyone has any questions or needs any assistance in any technical assistance in setting up like the phone trees or whatever, I have my email at the end of this presentation, so everyone can reach out to me to see how we can support this as well. But yeah, so if we're okay on this, or maybe if anyone needs any clarification on this, I mean, let's open up our remaining time for question and answers, and we can see what we can help everyone out with to make sure we're leaving this call comfortable and on the same page. So Susan is saying, do you have any specific asks for the call to the assembly?
I'll go ahead and take that, Pedro. Yes, we do, and we'll be sending that when we do the follow-up and asking you to make the call. Right now, what we're asking is you will be asking your assembly member to support AB 3030. It has to get through the Appropriations Committee, as Pedro indicated, but it's good to have a sense of support among all the members of the Assembly that'll help it get through with the committee members themselves. So we'll provide you with the specific ask will be, I would like you to support AB 3030. Here's why. I'm a constituent, and we'll be tracking this.
Yeah, okay. And I see Vic is asking, will you set up Zoom sessions with legislatures? So do you want to explain that process a little more?
Sure. So we have a team. So in the past, those of you who have Advocacy Day in the past, we've always had an Audubon staff person that has worked with a team of Audubon members. Usually we've congregated folks that are in a particular region like Southern California or the Central Valley. And that team leader has led those that team to each of their meetings throughout the day. This year, we'll have a team leader that'll be working with regional members, but that team leader will be setting up the Zoom calls, sharing that Zoom information and scheduling that with the participants from Audubon, and then hosting that. So they'll initiate the call and host that call with the legislator and their staff at the particular time and day. Yeah, Vic, if that doesn't answer all your questions, please feel free to follow up and let me know.
Yeah, and I can add just very briefly on that. Again, so Audubon will be doing the heavy lifting just to make sure there are Audubon, California, just to make sure like we eliminate like all the barriers to like participation as we can. But the toolkit that we will be sending out does have some discussions on just how to use Zoom, some steps to take to set up a meeting just like otherwise as well. So and some resources to direct you to actually the Zoom website where there's some pretty informative videos as well too. So we'll be providing information just generally to support people in these processes. For this, we'll be taking the lead. And so let me see. I see a question. Will you be sending us, actually, I go back to this. Will you be sending us a copy of AB 3030 sponsors and a list of appropriation committee members?
Yes, so that'll be part of the follow-up information that we'll provide, so you have that information. And because the next step, right, is we want you guys all reaching out to the members of the assembly, but ultimately we'll be targeting the appropriations committee members themselves specifically for special attention, because they'll be making the decision about whether the bill will get out of appropriations.
Okay, cool. So I'm just taking a look through this comments. Do you have any specific information on hashtags for social media, and will there be a resource for that information? So.
Yes, two things. So we're already with our colleagues that are working on, at other organizations that are working on AB 3030. We have a hashtag for that, which I believe is CA30X30, 30 by 30. And we'll provide that in the toolkit, so you'll see that. We also have some that we use for Audubon in general for bird conservation. So we'll include those. And you can always be checking. If you don't already follow Audubon California's Twitter, please do, and Facebook, and you'll be seeing posts. And one of the really easy ways that you can engage in that way is just see what Audubon California is posting and just retweet that. Especially and then the extra work you could do is, if you know your particular legislator's sign or Twitter handle, that you can tag them, retweet our thing and tag them and say, hey, Ash Kalra, thank you for AB 3030. Or hey, Senator Tony Atkins, thank you. Please make sure you support 3030 when it comes to the Senate, something like that.
Okay. Great. Okay, let's keep this lightning round going. All right, ready, Mike? I got a curveball for you. I see a question in the chat that says, is Advocacy Day only for bird advocacy, or will we be competing with other groups that day?
I don't know. We don't know the schedule of other groups. When we've done this live in the past, sometimes there's been other groups in the building, sometimes there's not. Right now, we're pretty confident that we can be setting up the calls. If there is competition, they'll set up those calls with other people at other times. So we're not worried that that's going to interfere with our day.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And yeah, I would say, and also, taking action on climate yields benefits for a lot of other, organizations that, are working on climate change, or groups that work with populations, again, that are, burdened by climate change as well, too. So I think, there can be some degree of maybe complementary advocacy as well, too, rather than us competing per se.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I'm seeing a lot of questions about the toolkit. One being, will the toolkit include some key facts to reinforce messages of support, and a tutorial or toolkit of guidance for non-Twitter users? And I see in parentheses guilty. I don't think there's a need to feel guilty about it. But at least I can say, for myself, since I'm taking lead on developing the toolkit, maybe if there are any other things that people feel that might be helpful, include them in the chat as well too in this toolkit. Just again, so we can make sure we're supporting everyone in the ways that you all are identifying this as well too. Yeah,
and to
so
answer that, for guidance, not the guidance on the non-Twitter, like, again, I think maybe Kathy Bleer wrote that, and Kat, I am perhaps one of the worst in my organization on Twitter, so don't feel bad at all. You could even take pride in that. But I would say on the facts and figures that are there, many of you know in the past we've done action alerts about AB 3030. We will be doing a broadcast action alert too, but what we're asking you guys to do is something a little more specific, since you've shown interest already on the call. And yes, what we've done in action alerts is provided kind of a template letter and some facts, and we will have that information for you so you feel kind of literate on the issue and on the particular talking points. One of the key things when you call legislators to weigh in on an issue like this is you need to, you want to keep your message very succinct. So you want to be calling them up, say, hi, this is who I am. This is my affiliation, if you want to say that. I'm a constituent, if it's appropriate to say that. And I want you to support AB 3030 because it will make California healthier for birds and for people and help us adjust to climate change. You know, we'll have something like that. So just know that we'll give you that kind of information so you feel well prepared when you're doing your outreach.
Okay, cool. So I have one more question before we wrap up this section again. So if anyone has any burning questions, let's get them in before in about a minute or two. But one question is, will you be sending the toolkit to all of us participants today directly? So I would say yes, we want that.
Yeah, that's the idea.
Yeah, and one more question. I think many people will need a lot more on how to do these things you're asking folks to do. Will that be part of the toolkit? Yes, absolutely. That's one reason too we wanted, you know, there's more detail for some of the issues that I discussed during my brief section, but definitely we are providing like sentence frames, sample social media posts, some more clarification on some roles that chapters would need to perform these advocacy tasks more efficiently or effectively. So we are definitely trying to help out. And again, one last question, will you send us a list of others from our region who are participating in Advocacy Day? Yes, we'll eventually be talking to everyone. Yeah, we'll be putting everyone into teams, so we'll be coordinating everyone. But I think that's a good opportunity. If there's anyone who who would be interested, definitely outreach and let us know or let them know that this is an opportunity to plug in, because we need that information sooner than later to help us figure out the accommodations that we would need for our Zoom meetings.
Can I ask one? I'm going to add one more thing too,
okay.
Pedro, on the Advocacy Day, because I saw that Nancy Petrosky raised the issue of how much information people need. And one of the things we've done in the past is we've had talking points, and for everybody, we give you, talking points, and then we might have a group of anywhere from 5 to 15 members that are participating in an in-person meeting with the legislator. And usually what we've done in those circumstances is we've asked maybe 2 or 3 people to be the primary speakers with the legislator for that time. The expectation this year will be similar because we're on video calls and we don't want people sort of talking over each other. When we break you into teams and then your team leader is working with you for those particular meetings that you're going to be scheduled with, we're going to ask that maybe we identify 2 or 3 speakers that will be the primary speakers for that. So if anybody's ever uncomfortable with an issue, it's okay. But we still want you to participate, because just showing up and having your face there on the screen demonstrates that this is an issue and demonstrates Audubon's presence and breadth. And so I don't want anybody to feel that the knowledge of the particular policies or laws is a barrier to participating. Even if you just log in, show up, put in your name in the chat, that is a contribution that is important and valuable. So please just remember that, but we will be getting out more information as well, so everyone feels as well prepared as they'd like.
Yeah, absolutely. And the one last question was, will this presentation be available online? Yes, it is being recorded. We are also streaming this on Facebook Live, so if anyone would like to redirect to our Facebook page, you'd be able to find this also there. But we will be attaching this in one of our follow-up emails. But given that we are just about at time, I want to start transitioning us out of this. So if there are any questions or any follow-ups, please contact me, pedro.hernandez@audubon.org, for any questions or any concerns. If I can't answer them, I'll definitely direct them to someone who can. But also, join our next webinar. We have one next Wednesday at the 20th, highlighting climate change in the San Joaquin Valley, which is near and dear to my heart because I've lived and worked in the San Joaquin Valley for all my life. And on Friday, we'll be discussing coastal resiliency for the coast. So I think they're going to be two great webinars. And again, we're going to do our best to make sure they're interactive and as responsive to our audience as possible. So again, tell your friends, and again, we'll try to put on a good show for everyone. And, we are looking very forward to continuing this amazing partnership between the chapters and Audubon, California, for our shared message of, healthy birds, healthy communities, and a healthy planet. So thank you all again. Feel free to reach out. And again, help us share this great advocacy day that we're doing with everyone that you might think would be interested. So Mike, do you have any last thoughts?
No, only thank you very much. I hope you're all healthy, and hope you continue to be healthy, you get out and see some birds, and that you will continue to be engaged with Audubon and support us. Thank you so much for all your support and work in the past, and stay well. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day.